Let's assume we have used the yellow sticky approach demonstrated in the previous tutorial to map out the sequence of activities necessary to accomplish the project. It is not until we know the sequence of activities and how they depend on one another that we can enter this information into MS Project. Notice that we enter predecessor information into the entry table, and we are also viewing the Gantt chart here on the right. Remember that when we used the yellow sticky approach, we only worked with the work packages. This is because they are the activities that directly consume time and will create our schedule. When entering in predecessor information into MS Project, we will only be entering in predecessor information for the lowest level of the work breakdown structure or the work packages, and not for major deliverables or summary tasks, which only summarize the activities indented beneath them. As determined after we completed the yellow sticky approach, the first task that we needed to complete was interviewing the users. This is the only work package that will not have a predecessor because it is the first activity that will be completed. Once this is completed, we can define the performance requirements for the software. Since interviewing the users is in row 3, indicated right here, we can enter a 3 under the predecessor column for define requirements. We are telling the software that activity 3, or interviewing the users, must be completed before we can define the requirements in the software. In other words, activity 3 is the predecessor for defining the requirements. You can also see that our Gantt chart is starting to form and make more sense. We can now see that interviewing the users will be scheduled before defining the requirements. Once the requirements have been defined, we can design the logic for the software, which is activity 6. So activity 4 is the predecessor for activity 6. Once we have designed the logic, we can design the database. So activity 6 must be completed before we can begin activity 7. Before we finish entering in predecessors, I want to point out that just because the work packages in a work breakdown structure are listed in a certain order doesn't mean that the activities will be implemented in that order. It is important to understand that the work breakdown structure does not show any task dependency information or relationships between tasks. The work breakdown structure is simply a breakdown of work. This is why we need to use a tool such as the yellow sticky approach to determine the dependencies between tasks. All of the predecessor information has now been entered. Remember that predecessor information comes from a process that places the activities in a meaningful sequence, such as the yellow sticky approach. It makes sense that some activities may require more than one activity to be completed before it can begin. For example, in this project, integrating the software and hardware can begin once code A, code B, and assembling the hardware have all been completed. If we slide the Gantt chart over next to our work breakdown structure, we can see that it has developed further after we have entered in all the predecessor information. It is important to acknowledge that the Gantt chart best displays when activities start and when they finish relative to a timeline. This is something that the network diagram doesn't do very well. You can learn more about the network diagram in a future tutorial. Also notice that we have developed some very useful information in the top row of our entry table. We can see here that MS Project has rolled up all of the information entered in and has summarized it for the entire project in this row. The project is estimated to take 24 days to complete and will be completed on August 12, 2022.